Hello everyone, this is Heroes Trivia, and welcome back to our second dev diary on the multiplayer balance mod, as today we'll be taking a look at all the changes for the champion class. Once again, the main purpose of these changes is to bring consistency to generals for multiplayer battles, especially in regards to many of the DLC characters that were poorly implemented by CA for custom battles. In addition to that, another primary goal for the mod is to make future subscriber game tournaments more balanced with minimal changes, as I don't want to force players to relearn the game. So with all that considered, let's get started first by looking at the design philosophy behind the champion class. Now, champions are high health, high morale, and hard-hitting generals that specialize in dealing damage. However, to counterbalance their strength, champions have a low melee evasion of 28, and no base attack speed bonus in their kit, which makes them the opposite in design to the Sentinel grinded out style. And if we look at the baseline stats that I'm going to be using for champions for this balance mod, their tier 3 costs will average around 1800 for an average champion. Ones that are weaker will be slightly cheaper, ones with unbreakable or are stronger will be more expensive, but they'll average around 1800. The default weapon for characters without special weapons will now be Ancestral Pledge, replacing some of those silver heirloom spears that we see in multiplayer even for tier 3 generals. Horses will be Brown Elite, morale will be 75, hit point will be 54k for a large unit size. Their base charge will be 161, and if you add on the elite horses 30 points, you'll usually see 191 unless they have other modifiers in their kit. They will no longer have any base attack speed modifiers, as 0% will just mean whatever their weapon attack speed is, that's what they will have for their attack speed. Unless they have certain traits in their kit, those are not changed for this mod, but those are very minor and rare. And their melee evasion will be set to 28, which is shared across the majority of the champion class already, reflecting their sort of low evasion but high health type of defensive style. And if we look at the 3 default ability here, you'll see Binding Fury, Hamstring, and then Mending, which is a bandit champion ability. I'm including it here because the third passive champion ability for the default Han general is actually not available on any champion characters. It is available on certain 8 Princes character in custom battle, and we'll treat that one sort of as a unique ability when it comes up. But for the default abilities of Binding Fury, Hamstring, and now Mending, which has a few bandit characters in the champion class, this will be fine as it is. I don't see a need to make changes to any of these abilities. They all have their unique usage, and they're all quite nice actually. Binding Fury is your typical anti-general hard-hitting ability with no drawback, such as the ones that do 11k damage, but forces you to pay about 5% of your health, including some debuff to the characters during the duration. Here is just a straight-up attack damage. Hamstring is really useful when you're dismounted because it is a circular attack animation that is good for clearing infantry. If you are on horseback, then the debuff is what you're looking for, with the 50% speed debuff and the 30-second additional increase to cooldown of your enemy's abilities, as there's just not much damage on this ability here with 1.9k for large unit size. But as I said, this is great for champions who need to clear enemy infantry when dismounted. Then lastly, Mending actually doesn't heal that much. 1.6k heal over 20 seconds is very, very low, but you can heal up to all 3 of your generals if you use it on yourself, with the other 2 generals within the range of 35 meters. So there's still a good chunk of total heal you can give to your team. But the really attractive part about this ability here is the 20-second duration of increasing 50% armor and 50% melee evasion, and that's what really makes this ability strong. There's a decent cooldown on the ability, and there's a limited use of 4, and it's only available on certain generals. That helps to make up for the poor bandit roster for most of those generals. So I feel like this is a good ability to remain unchanged, quite powerful in its own right. Now, moving on to the character changes, we can start with Dian Wei here, which will see a price increase from 1350 to 1500, which is below the average cost of 1800 because I believe he is on the weaker side, given his unique weapon choice plus his abilities. If we look at his weapon here, it's the silver dual ji. Now, there is no gold version of this weapon, and since this weapon is given to him for historical reasons, I decided to keep it. And there is a built-in passive ability that's unique to him called Cry of the Forest that does make the weapon hurt more by increasing its damage sixfold once you fall below 20% health, which for the champion class, it's a okay number because 54k base at 20%, you're still over 10k in health. And at that point, Dian Wei will see that sixfold increase in base and armor piercing damage for his weapon. He will also gain Cause Terror. And in addition to that, I believe he needs a slight buff to increase it by 50% melee evasion, pushing his evasion up to 78%, which sort of extends his life if he is in melee combat. And that's a huge if, because the counterplay to this is to charge him with cavalry or even units to bypass his evasion, or to kill him with range, as armor piercing damage will be quite good against him. And the reason why I did this is more or less for historical reasoning, since Dian Wei was Cao Cao's bodyguard that gave up his life fighting in the streets to buy time for Cao Cao to run away, and in the end he was taken out by ranged weapons or enemy charges, as he was very fearsome in hand-to-hand combat, and this ability sort of reflect that, where he becomes a terror once he drops to low health, including a bit of high melee evasion, to make up for the fact that he is not going to be unbreakable at this point. You can beat him with three ways, essentially. You can morale shock him, you can use ranged weapons to bypass his 0 range block chance and 75% armor, use some crossbow shots, or you can just charge him with cavalry, where you erase his melee evasion and take him out with his low health. So there are ways to beat him, and given that he has 2 generic commander abilities instead of any damaging champion abilities, he's going to feel very weak early on until he hits that 20% health mark where he gets this strength boost. So overall, I think this cost ratio and change to his ability will make him more viable, and hopefully we'll see more Dian Wei in multiplayer battles. Then moving on to Guan Yu, we have a cost discount going from 2,500 to 2,400. Now these are not arbitrary math. I'm basically taking the average cost, 1,800, and adding 600 because he has ability to make himself unbreakable in terms of unstoppable, which I'm giving it a small tweak to make it more reliable. So we end up with 2,400. Now, Guan Yu is known for his unique ability God of War, which is a one-use melee attack. If you hit, it does 38k splash damage, which is technically base damage. So I want to change that to armor piercing damage because I think 38k base damage is too low, given that your targets are often generals. You will not be killing sentinels and champions outright, given that they have 40k health and 54k health, even if it's armor piercing. And for other classes like Vanguard and Champions, if they have anywhere close to 50% armor, you're also not killing them as you're dealing about 19k damage to someone who has 25k health. And given that this is sort of a romance reference to the fact that Guan Yu can kill enemy generals in one swing, I feel like giving him an armor piercing element is much better, and also encourages counterplay where you try to boost your general's melee evasion when facing Guan Yu. Of course, on the flip side, you can combo Guan Yu with characters that can drop enemy melee evasion, but since this is one use only, I feel like it's an adequate change for Guan Yu here, as most likely you're killing a Vanguard, Commander, or even a Strategist, if that Strategist doesn't have Stifling Deluge, which will shut this ability down. Now, the other change we're making to Guan Yu is the unstoppable condition. Here, you need to be in combat and winning said combat, which becomes really tricky for the AI to deal with, since you might be fighting a general pretty even 1 second, where this does not pop up, and then you switch target to an infantry near you, and then you're deemed winning in that second, and suddenly you get this damage boost, melee evasion boost, cause terror, and unbreakable. It's just very flip-floppy and unreliable with the condition of winning, and it's hard to gauge that for the player using Guan Yu or the player going up against Guan Yu. So instead, we're just going to make it much more clear. If Guan Yu is in melee combat, then he's going to get all these bonuses, which essentially make Guan Yu unbreakable if he's fighting. He gets a 10% boost to melee evasion, but given how low the base evasion is for champions, I don't think it's a huge deal. 20% armor piercing damage is quite good, but most of the three brothers' weapons tend to be heavy on base and very light on armor piercing. So 20% of this 993 damage figure for large unit size is not going to be a drastic change in his damage output, but overall still something that's very nice to have. And of course, there's still some counterplay options, given that you can remove yourself from combat from Guan Yu, which might be difficult since he does have the red hair, so he can play Run You Down and maintain melee combat if he wishes. But overall, I feel giving Guan Yu, who costs quite a bit in multiplayer for his character cost, something that is strong, given he has a very weak roster of units, is going to help balance him out a bit, and maybe we'll see him show up a bit more. Then moving on to Sima Ai, the 8 princes, we have a couple changes. Cost is going up from 1875 to 2100. This does not mean he is strong. I'm setting his base cost to 1500, but adding 600 because he's unbreakable. He's going to get a weapon upgrade from the Silver Heirloom Spear to the Ancestral Pledge, and the Sima characters from 8 princes apparently all have 16% melee evasion, which is kind of weird. So that's going up to 28% to match the rest of the champion class. He has 3 default abilities from 3 different classes. We're not changing any of the champion abilities, so there's no change there. Overall, he's a pretty average character. His unique units are not very good. The weapon upgrade will help him a bit, but he's not going to be deemed strong unless you're looking for an unbreakable champion character. He's probably not your first choice, and I'm okay with that. Then moving on to Sima Liang. We're going to see a similar cost change to 2100 for the same reasons, deemed a bit weak, but unbreakable. He is going to drop his base attack rate from a 40% bonus to 0%, as apparently he has sort of this Sentinel vibe to his skill tree. I think it's because 8 Prince's character have a mixed skill tree, so he has Zeal on his tree even though he's a champion. Regardless, base evasion is going up from 16% to 28%. He does have some interesting abilities since he has Tenacity of Steel, which will see the same change of 1 second, 2 second, 3 second, 4 seconds, as we mentioned before in our Sentinel Dev Diary a week prior. So he is going to get stronger in that regard, but overall, the limitations for most of the 8 Princes characters. But overall, the limitation for 8 Princes characters will remain their poor roster, and it's hard to see them get used, even though these changes will make them come up to par compared to the other champion characters in terms of their evasion and their weapon, as well as cost. So it balances out at the end of the day. Then we have Wei Yan, who is going to see his cost going from the default 1500 DLC character cost to 1800 because he's pretty average, if not a bit strong. Morale is going to go up to 75 to match the rest of the champion class. His charge bonus is going up to 161 from 116, which might be a typo, or it might be a class shift difference given that he might have been a Sentinel before. His evasion is going from 16% to 28%. Now, it does say 26% here in the graphic, and that's because he has a 10% bonus from his armor, and that's going to stay. So his overall total evasion is going to go up to 38%. I'm not going to change any of the armor stats, so this is totally fine. He has 2 unique abilities, Reckless Strike, 5% health for 11k damage, with some debuff on the enemy that lasts 15-second duration, which is actually really nice. So this is a very powerful anti-general ability. And then he also have Into the Breach, which is a nice charge ability for your cavalry or maybe even your infantry, as you'll give them a 50% melee charge bonus and 15 points of extra morale within 75 meters of you. It's one of those pretty nice commander buffs that's shared amongst a few characters. Nothing really to change here. I think the density of the ability is quite nice. Offensively, you can give melee charge bonus. Defensively, you can give morale. And the cooldown is decently long to not make this ability a problem. Then continue to Wen Chou. We're going to see his cost go up to 2100. This is not because he has any sort of unbreakability. I just feel like he's a pretty strong character overall, so he's above average, so slightly higher than 1800. He's going to be coming at 2100. And the reason for that strength is his unique Xiezhi Roar ability. It's a 4-use Roar ability that drops 30 points of morale. Speaking of morale, his own morale will go up to 75 to match the rest of the champion roster. Seems like a lot of DLC character came in 65 for some reason, especially the champions, 10 point less than everyone else by default. But back to his ability. This ability is quite unique for most Roar abilities, because you don't have to be in combat to use it, and it does drop the morale by quite a lot. 30 point is a hefty amount. It has a 35 meter range, and the cooldown's decent. Duration is on the low side at 15 seconds, but that's reasonable because you don't really want this debuff to apply for too long, or else it gets too strong, as you have limited time to chase down these units if you did sort of route them during the process. It's a great ability. It doesn't take away from his damage. He still has Hamstring. He still has Binding Fury. He has a very good weapon in his axe. So overall, pretty powerful character. Has a great roster with Yuan Shao's unit coming from the Fates Divided DLC. So very, very powerful character here, reflecting his above average cost. Then we come to Xiahou Dun, who is going to see a cost decrease back to 1800, just average. He has pretty much the standard set. Now his unique ability, Vengeance, has a very interesting activation. You have to be under fire, which means someone has to shoot at you, whether with ranged weapons, with towers, or you can even try to shoot at yourself. It's possible. Basically, you have to get shot. And then you get a 50% damage boost to your base and armor piercing damage, and you also gain Mighty Knockback. Now, my problem with this is it's really hard to come under fire in battles in general, whether it's campaign or multiplayer. So I feel like the change here is really just to change the duration to infinite. So once you get shot once, you're pissed off for life, which makes sense in his case because he lost the eye, which is why he gets this ability in the first place. So if you can manufacture some situation where you get Xiahou Dun shot, and then you pick up this ability, then you're good for the rest of the match, which I feel is a pretty fair balance in terms of strength to make Xiahou Dun more unique and more viable. And the 50% damage boost is not going to be huge. His weapon is Ancestral Pledge. It will boost his base to around, 690. And then his armor piercing goes up to 2.1k, which is significant. And that's nice because there are difficulties to getting yourself under fire in certain battle setup. And that might create a situation for your own draft where you want to pick up a few range unit and maybe charge Xiahou Dun into the enemy line and then start shooting that enemy line, hoping for a friendly fire shot to activate Xiahou Dun's ability. It's a bit tricky. It's not something that's automatic, so the reward should be something that's better. In this case, infinite duration. And then we come to our most problematic character in the champion class, Xu Chu, who has been on our ban list for both seasons before. And that's because he has not one, not two, but three very powerful unique abilities, on top of the fact he has a very good weapon that deals 2.7k armor piercing damage. So first off, his cost is going from 1995, which is a weird number to begin with, to 2700, which is probably the highest cost we have in the game. And this is a reflection that he is a strong character, so he's above average, so 2100 to start. And he's able to gain Unbreakable from one of his abilities once he falls off to a certain health threshold, which gives him the added 600 costs. Now, even at 2700, maybe he's still a little bit cheap and a value play. But the main goal here with the mod is not to gut Xu Chu, but rather just make him playable. It's okay if he's still strong, as long as he has some counterplay options, which we'll discuss as we go through how all three of his abilities will be changed. And in regards to the ability in question here, it's his first one, Condemned How, which is an active ability that can be activated only when you're below 20% health. So once you drop below that 10.8k health, you can activate this for 10 times damage. The drawback is that you will lose 100% of your range block chance, 100% of your melee evasion, but you will become unbreakable. Now, there is some romance reference to this, where Xu Chu has been fighting Ma Chao for 300 rounds, comes back naked, and fights him for the remaining of the night. So because of that, I'm going to drop his armor by 100% as well to give more drawback on him in terms of how fast he will die at that point, because I really don't want him to get too many swings at 10 times damage. And if you have certain strategies where you can heal, as there are characters such as Cao Ren or Pang Tong who will also become pickable after the mod changes, this will give Xu Chu a huge advantage because you can activate this after you drop below 20k health, and then you can try to heal him back so that he can become, 10 times damage, but, full health potentially if you get a lot of healing on him. So I feel it's pretty crucial to give him a lot of drawbacks. In this case, he would just have absolutely no defensive stats, pure glass cannon, 10 times damage Xu Chu, which is still super strong because at 10 times damage, we're talking about 27k damage per swing, which if it hits, it's one-shotting champions, vanguards, and commanders. Now, while that sounds very scary, there are plenty of counterplays. Just keep your generals away from him and fight him with infantry, because match combat's going to give him a very hard time to kill a lot of units. You're wasting a lot of damage per swing on a very few units that you will splash onto. So overall, it's scary, but it should be scary. And if you see your opponent pick Xu Chu, make sure to take away healing. Of course, you can also sort of use this Stifling Deluge type of style to prevent him from ever activating this ability and kill him when he's low, which will also be a pretty neat way to do it, given that his defensive stat innately is low anyways. But I think adding another minus 100% armor here is definitely the right thing to do. Then for his second ability, Earth Shattering Strike. Now this is a typical champion unique ability, similar to what we saw with Wei Yan earlier, that deals massive amount of splash damage, base damage, gives some sort of debuff, lasts a little bit, and has a cooldown of 60 seconds. But typically for those abilities, whether it's on He Jin or Wei Yan, has a 5% health penalty cost. And for Xu Chu, he doesn't have that. So we're going to add that back in. And that's going to play a role for his first ability in that you can manually drop your health down on cooldown if you wish to activate that ability so that you can get your Condemn Hao in the safety of your own army, because you can just sort of swing and miss with this ability to drop your health a little bit. Maybe if you're close to that 10.8k situation, you just use this to drop it down. And that's fine, because the main reason why Xu Chu is banned in our tournaments is actually for his third ability, Historic Defender, which is a passive buff that gives his other generals near him 70% damage resistance. This is outrageously strong because you can combo this with your other generals. So for example, if you're playing alongside Meng Huo and Zhu Rong, who has Power of Love, that means they have 95% damage resistance. And God forbid you're playing with large armies and you add a Wu general with one of the handmade guards, another 25%, and suddenly Zhu Rong and Meng Huo is unkillable, which is why we didn't do a large army round in our last tournament, because things can get out of hand with stacking damage resistances and things become very broken very fast. So to change this, first the damage resistant figure from Xu Chu should drop to 25%. That's already a pretty hefty amount if you consider the fact that you can still stack this with different sources to bring it to 50% and possibly even 75%. But the other change here that's going to make this more restricting is that Xu Chu must be in melee combat to activate this. So he must be doing a bodyguard's job by fighting for your other generals to give those nearby generals that damage resistance, which alone does not really limit this ability, because you can have all three of your generals fighting together. He will still be giving the other two 25% damage resistance. What is really going to limit him here is actually the condition of maintaining above 80% health for this to remain active. So the moment that Xu Chu loses his first 10.8k health, this ability just goes away. And that I feel is fair, because if he's strong, he can fight for you. You're basically using him as a lifelink bodyguard where he's taking the damage. But the second that he takes damage to a certain point, which can be influenced by the fact that if he wants to use Reckless Strike, then he's going to start losing those health. And then at that point, he becomes useless in terms of a defender, but he's getting closer to Condemn Hao. So he's still a very interesting character with abilities on both sides of his health spectrum, where he becomes more of a bodyguard at early points of the game, and then he becomes a killing machine at later points of the game, and it's up to your opponent to see how you fight him. He's still going to be very overpowered, I think, and he's still going to get high pick rate and ban rate, especially with our pick ban setup, and that's probably fine. If your opponent has more important things to ban and leave him open, definitely a very rewarding pick, and I think that's how we're going to approach Xu Chu at this point. Essentially, I feel like these changes are just going to make him a more interesting character, as all three abilities play into each other, and the very fact that he has 3 unique abilities make him very different from everyone else, and that's how we're going to approach things. And if he still feels strong to you, that's supposed to be the way it is. I don't want to gut all the unique characters that are strong to a point where you might not want to pick them. That defeats the purpose. There are plenty of strong characters in the game right now, whether it's Liu Chong with his infinite poke or Fa Zheng with his unmissable damage, and you're essentially going to have to counterplay against that. If they pick something strong, you need to pick something strong to play against it. And in Xu Chu's case, I think these changes gives him some limitations and some counterplay capabilities where your opponent might be able to craft a strategy against him if you see him pick. For example, Zhang Fei will be a great counter, since Xu Chu is not unbreakable until he's below 20% health. So you're basically trading the roar to take Xu Chu off the field. You run up to him, you roar, and you have a light cavalry chase him and escort him off the battlefield. There are always ways around these things, and I think maintaining his strength is one of the goals. So moving on from Xu Chu, we have Yan Yu. We're moving to the bandit character territories. We already saw that mending is not going to get changed. His cost is going to go up from the default DLC character cost of 1500 to 1800. He's also going to get the right horse, going from black elite to brown elite, not a big difference. And DLC morale 65 is just wrong for champions. He's going to be 75. His base evasion is also 16% plus 10% from armor. It's going to go up to 28% base. That will result in 38% at the end. He will have his unique stalker ability, which I think it's great. This ability is super underrated. If you can get your units to fight in the forest with him, you give them higher melee evasion, higher missile resistance, and the ability to snipe if they have range capabilities. So a great ability here, and people should use it more. Doesn't really need a change. And moving on to Zhang Yan, we have another champion bandit. Cost is going to go down. He's going to be below average because he has a dual axe. I'm not going to give him the same weapon as Zheng Jiang, the Red Sisters, so he's stuck with the silver version, which is why he's below average cost. He's going to go from 1695 to 1500, which is the lowest floor for champions. His morale is also going to go from 65 to 75, which I think is just a holdover from the bandit character having slightly lower morale, which I don't think is needed. He will also have the bandit targeted strike ability, and since we're not going to have many bandit characters here, I'm going to treat it sort of as a unique one. And taking a look at it, it's basically hamstring with some different effects, and I think it's totally fine. It gives him sort of a alternative to hamstring ability that he can use when he's dismounted to kill units. He has Binding Fury, so you can just think of this as the bandit hamstring ability. And finally, we have Zheng Jiang, who is going to come in at the average cost of 1800 because her axe is really good. Her morale is just fine, so there's nothing to change there. Her unique ability here is Poison Blade, 3-use missile attack. Hard to hit. When you do hit, a pretty rewarding damage over 15 seconds. So for these missile abilities here, I'm going to be boosting most of their damage up. In this case, we're adding another 10k to it to make it 20k because it's really hard to hit. And if your opponent is at least observant, the counterplay to this is just clicking left and then clicking right, zigzag, and you dodge the ability. And that makes this completely useless. So you're trying to catch your opponent off guard. So if you do catch them off guard, it should be super rewarding. So abilities like this, ability like Heartseeker, will all see a damage buff in this mod, just to make them a bit more attractive compared to the standard repeatable use abilities. And this is probably a trend you already seen from how we're trying to modify the damages for Hail of Arrows, trying to modify the damages for God of War, and now we're just boosting the base damage for Poison Blade. Not going to really change it to armor piercing. I don't think there's a purpose there. Poison damage is kind of weird to begin with, and also you can hit a unit and it still would do decent amount. And with that, that's basically all the plan changes for the Champion General so far, not including any unit changes that we will be covering in a separate dive diary in the future. Hopefully y'all like what you see, and remember to like the video to help out the channel, and also subscribe so that we can hit that 30k subscriber milestone faster, which will trigger the start of our next subscriber game tournament. And if there are any changes here that you disagree with or propose some additional changes for us to consider, then definitely do so in the comment section below. And I'll see you all next week, as we'll be covering the strategist class where we have multiple generals that are universally banned. So that'll be interesting to take a look at. And until then, bye.